I used to think the campus at night was peaceful. During the day it was loud, students everywhere, music playing from open windows, people laughing, rushing to class, complaining about deadlines. At night, all of that disappeared. The buildings felt bigger, the paths felt longer, the silence wrapped around everything. This happened during my second year of college, right before finals week. I had an exam the next morning that I wasn't ready for. My dorm was too noisy and the common study rooms were full, so I decided to go to the main library. It stayed open late during finals, but only certain floors. You needed your student ID to get in after midnight. I got there around 1:20 a.m. The front doors unlocked after I scanned my card. Inside, the lights were dimmed. Not off, just low enough to remind you it was late and you shouldn't be there too long. The security desk near the entrance was empty, but that was normal. The guard usually walked around instead of sitting. I took the elevator up to the fourth floor. That floor was supposed to stay open all night. The other floors closed at midnight. When the elevator doors opened, the floor was almost empty. A few desks had abandoned notes. For the first hour, everything was normal. I studied, checked my phone, drank bad vending machine coffee. The library was quiet in that familiar way, pages turning, keyboards clicking, someone coughing far away. Around 2:30 a.m. I noticed something small. A light turned on. It was on the far end of the floor past a row of tall bookshelves. That section was usually dark at night. No desks there, just old reference books no one touched. At first I didn't think much of it. Maybe another student went back there, or a janitor. I went back to studying. 10 minutes later I realized something else. The sound of typing had stopped. The cough I'd been hearing was gone. I slowly looked around. I was alone. Every other desk was empty. That wasn't impossible. People came and went all. I tried to ignore it. Then I saw movement between the shelves, just a shadow shifting, not fast, not obvious, like someone leaning and then stepping back. I stared, waiting to see it again. Nothing. I told myself I was tired. Finals week did that to you. Your brain filled in gaps that weren't really there. I stood up and walked toward the shelves, pretending I needed to stretch. The light was definitely on back there, but the aisle itself was empty. No bag. No books out of place. No person. I felt stupid for being nervous. I went back to my desk. At 3:00 a.m. I packed up to leave. I had studied enough and my head hurt. As I closed my laptop, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The light was off. I knew it had been on. I hadn't seen anyone walk past me. The shelves blocked most of the view, but the aisle opening was visible from my desk. I hadn't seen anyone leave. I slung my bag over my shoulder and started. A soft scrape, like a chair leg dragging across the floor. It came from behind the shelves. I froze. The sound stopped. I stood there for a full 10 seconds listening. My heart was beating hard, loud in my ears. "Hello," I said quietly. I don't know why I said it. Maybe I expected a janitor to answer. No response. I took another step. The elevator was just ahead. I was almost there when the light behind the shelves turned on again. This time it didn't flick on normally. It came on slowly, like someone turning a dimmer switch. I didn't look back. I pressed the elevator button over and over until it lit up. The wait felt long, too long. While I waited, I heard footsteps. Not running, not sneaking, walking, slow, steady steps coming closer. I turned slightly, just enough to see the floor behind me. No one was there. The footsteps continued. Then they stopped. Right behind the shelves, close enough that if someone stepped out, they'd be in full view. The elevator dinged. I rushed inside and hit the lobby button. The doors started to close. At the last second, I saw movement between the shelves. Not a full person, just part of one. A shoulder, an arm. The doors closed before I could see more. My hands were shaking the whole way down. In the lobby, the lights were brighter. The security desk was still empty. I hurried to the exit and pushed through the doors into the cold night air. I didn't stop walking until I reached my dorm. The next day, I told myself it was stress. sleep deprivation. My imagination. A week passed. Then it happened again. This time I wasn't studying. I was meeting a friend who worked late in one of the campus offices. I waited for her outside, sitting on a bench near the library. It was around 2 a.m. From where I sat, I could see the fourth-floor windows. Most of them were dark. One wasn't. A single light glowed at the far end of the floor, the same section with the light flicked off. Then on again, then off. I stood up. The main doors of the library were locked, no card access lights, no one going in or out. I watched the window for another minute. Nothing. When my friend finally came out, I asked her something without explaining why. "Does anyone stay in the library overnight?" I asked. She frowned. "No, cleaning crew leaves before midnight. Security just does walk-throughs." I didn't tell her what I'd seen. A few days later, I mentioned it to a librarian I knew, casually, like a joke. She didn't laugh. "That section shouldn't have lights on at night," she said. "The switch is locked." I asked who had the key. She hesitated. "Facilities, security, that's it." I stopped going to the library at night after that. A month later, during summer break, I passed by campus with a friend. The buildings were mostly empty. The library was closed early for renovations. As we walked past, I looked up. The fourth floor was dark, except for one light, far end, between the shelves. I didn't stop to check. I didn't ask questions. I just kept walking. Some places don't need proof to feel wrong. Sometimes leaving is enough. I didn't have a car during my first year on campus. Most students didn't. That's why the university ran a night shuttle. It looped around campus from 10 p.m. to 3 a.m., stopping at dorms, the library, and a few remote parking lots. It was meant to keep students safe, especially at night. I used it a lot. This happened in late October, when nights got colder and darker earlier. I had stayed late at a study group that ran longer than expected. By the time we finished, it was past 2:30 a.m. The last shuttle usually came around 2:45. I walked to the nearest stop, which sat at the edge of campus near the old science buildings. That part of campus felt different at night. The buildings were older, made of stone and brick, and surrounded by trees that blocked most of the light. The shuttle stop was just a bench and a pole with a sign. No shelter, no camera, no emergency phone. I checked my phone, no new messages. Low battery. I sat down and waited. At first everything felt normal. Crickets in the grass, wind in the trees, the distant hum of traffic from the road beyond campus. Then I noticed the silence. The crickets stopped all at once. I pulled my jacket tighter and watched the road, expecting to see the shuttle's headlights any second. Instead, I saw someone walking. He came from between two buildings, stepping out of the shadows into the path that led toward the stop. He was tall, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. His hands were in his pockets. That wasn't unusual. Students walked around late all the time. Still, something about him made me uneasy. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't rushing. He was walking slowly, like he had nowhere specific to be. He stopped about 10 feet from the bench. "Is this the shuttle stop?" he asked. His voice was calm, normal. "Yeah," I said. "Does it still come this late?" "Last one should be soon," I replied. He nodded and sat down on the far end of the bench. We sat there in silence. I could not checking his phone, not fidgeting, just sitting. After a minute he spoke again. "You live on campus?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Which dorm?" I hesitated. "North side." That was vague but true. He nodded again. The quiet stretched out. I checked my phone. 2:47 a.m. The shuttle was late. I looked down the road, still empty. "That's weird," I said, mostly to myself. He didn't respond. I glanced at him. He was staring straight ahead, eyes fixed on the dark road. "Do you use the shuttle a lot?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "No," he said, "just tonight." His answer felt final, like he didn't want to keep talking. A few seconds later, I noticed something else. He didn't have a backpack. Every student I knew carried something at night. A bag, a laptop sleeve, something. He had nothing. No headphones, no keys in his hand, nothing bulging in his pockets. The minutes passed slowly. 2:52 a.m. I pulled up the campus shuttle app. It showed the shuttle icon sitting at the main dorm hub, not moving. "That's not good," I muttered. The guy beside me leaned forward slightly. "They sometimes stop early," he said. My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Sometimes they don't finish the route," he replied, "if it's empty." I hadn't heard that before. I stood up. "I'm going to walk back toward the main road," I said, "see if I can catch it there." He looked up at me for the first time. His eyes were tired, flat. "It's a long walk," he said. "I know," I replied. I stepped away from the bench and started down the path toward the lit part of campus. After a few steps, I heard him stand up behind me. "Wait," he said. I stopped but didn't turn around. "What?" I asked. "You shouldn't walk alone," he said. "It's not safe." I swallowed. "I'll be fine." I started walking again. He followed, not fast, not slow, just matching my pace. I could hear his footsteps on the path behind me. I didn't run. I didn't want to panic. I just kept walking, pretending this was normal. We reached a fork in the path. One way. I turned toward the dorms. He didn't. He stopped at the fork. For a second, I thought it was over. Then he spoke. "The shuttle doesn't go that way," he said. "I know," I replied without turning around. I walked faster. I didn't hear his footsteps anymore. I reached a lit area near the dorms and stopped under a street lamp. My heart was pounding. I turned around. The path behind me was empty. No sign of him. I stood there for a minute, catching my breath. Then my phone buzzed. A notification from the shuttle app. "Last shuttle has completed its route." I stared at the screen. That meant there was no shuttle coming. I looked back toward the dark path, half expecting to see him standing there. Nothing. I walked the rest of the way to my dorm without stopping. The next morning I told my roommate what happened. She listened quietly. "That's creepy," she said, "but maybe he was just worried." I wanted to believe that. A few days later I mentioned it to a campus security officer during a safety presentation. I described the shuttle stop, the time, the guy. His expression changed. "That stop was removed last year," he said. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "It's not an active stop anymore," he explained. "The route changed. Shuttles don't go there after midnight." I felt cold all over. "But the sign is still there," I said. He nodded. "Facilities hasn't taken it down yet." I didn't use the shuttle after that. A month later I walked past that area during the day. The bench was gone. Just an empty patch of concrete and a pole with no sign. Sometimes I think about that night. If I had stayed on the bench, if I had waited a few. I was a teaching assistant during my final year of college. It wasn't a prestigious job. Mostly grading papers, answering emails, and occasionally holding review sessions for students who waited until the last minute. But it came with one responsibility I didn't enjoy: locking up the lecture hall after late-night sessions. Most professors left before 9 p.m. My review session ended at 11:15. By the time the last student packed up and left, the building was quiet. Too quiet. The lecture hall was in one of the oldest academic buildings on campus, built decades ago. Narrow hallways, high ceilings, and lights that hummed instead of buzzed. At night, the place felt hollow, like sound didn't belong there. I gathered my notes, turned off the projector, and walked down the steps toward the exit. That's when I heard movement, not footsteps, chairs, the soft scrape of a chair being pulled across the floor. I froze halfway down the stairs. The hall should have been empty. I had watched every student leave. I even waited a few extra minutes before packing up just to make sure. The sound came. No answer. I stood there, heart beating faster, listening. Nothing else moved. The lights above flickered once, then steadied. I told myself it was the building settling. Old structures made noise all the time. Still, I walked carefully back up the stairs, scanning the rows of seats. They were empty. Every chair was pushed in. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and turned toward the control booth at the back. I needed to shut off the main lights before leaving. As I walked past the last row, I noticed something out of place. One chair near the middle aisle was pulled out, just slightly, enough that it caught my eye. I stared at it for a moment. I was sure it hadn't been like that earlier. I pushed it back in and continued toward the booth. Inside, the control panel glowed softly. I flipped the switches the front lights dimmed, then the side lights. Only the emergency lights remained, casting long shadows across the room. I stepped out of the booth and headed toward the exit. Halfway down the aisle, I heard it again. A chair scraping. This time closer, I turned slowly. The same chair I had just pushed in was pulled out again. My mouth went dry. "No," I whispered, more to myself than anything else. I didn't approach it this time. I walked faster, keeping my eyes forward, trying not to think about the space behind me. Then I heard breathing. Not loud, not dramatic, just someone breathing slowly, evenly. I stopped. The sound wasn't coming from behind me. It was coming from above, from the rows higher up. I looked up into the darkness beyond the emergency lights. The upper seats were mostly shadows now, shapes without detail. "Is someone still here?" I asked. Silence. I took another step. The breathing stopped. I reached the exit door and grabbed It didn't move, locked. I stared at it, confused. This door was never locked from the inside. I tried again, harder. Nothing. My pulse hammered in my ears. I turned back toward the hall. The emergency lights flickered. For a brief moment, the room was brighter, and I saw someone sitting in the chair I had pushed in. Middle of the aisle, head slightly bowed, hands resting on their knees. I couldn't make out their face. The light steadied again and the figure blended back into shadow. I stood frozen, unable to move. "This isn't funny," I said, my voice shaking. No response. I backed away from the door slowly, keeping my eyes on the chair. The figure didn't move. I reached into my pocket for my phone. No signal. One bar, then none. I remembered the side exit, the one that led into the hallway behind the stage. I turned and started walking down the aisle, careful not to run. Halfway there, I heard the chair scraping. I pushed through the side door and stepped into the hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, painfully bright after the darkness of the hall. I slammed the door shut behind me. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing hard. Then the door handle rattled. Once, twice, slow, deliberate movements. I stepped back. "Hello?" I called. Nothing. The rattling stopped. I waited a full minute before moving. The hallway was empty, long, straight, doors on either side all closed. I walked quickly toward the main entrance. As I passed another lecture room, I glanced inside through the narrow window. Every seat was empty, except one. A single chair pulled out. Facing the door, I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I reached the main exit and pushed it open, spilling out into the cool night air. I didn't lock the building. I didn't look back. The next morning, I reported what happened to the department office. They listened politely, but I could tell they didn't believe me. One administrator frowned. "Are you sure you turned off the lights correctly?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She nodded. "Sometimes reflections can play tricks on you." I didn't argue. A week later, I checked the building schedule online. No classes had been booked in that lecture hall after 9 p.m. for the entire semester. No other TAs were assigned to lockup after hours. That responsibility had quietly been removed. I stopped holding late-night sessions after that. Sometimes when I pass that building at night, I see the lecture hall lights on. Just one row, middle aisle. And I don't try to explain it anymore. I was a junior in college when I got a part-time lab assistant job at the chemistry building. It wasn't exciting work, mostly cleaning glassware, restocking chemicals, and helping professors set up experiments, but it paid enough for food and coffee. The building itself was old, narrow corridors, high ceilings, and heavy doors that groaned when opened. At night, the place had a quiet that felt unnatural. Even the humming of the fluorescent lights seemed louder than usual. My shifts usually ended at 10 p.m. Most nights, I left with a few other students or lab techs, but one night I stayed late to finish cleaning a lab. The clock read 11. 5 p.m. when I locked the main door behind me and started heading to the side exit. That's when I noticed the lab door, Lab 204, was slightly ajar. I was sure I had locked it after finishing my work. I approached it thinking maybe I had been careless. Pushing it open, I flicked on the light switch. The room was empty. Benches and equipment were untouched, everything in order, nothing unusual. I laughed at myself for getting spooked and walked toward the exit. As I passed the hall near Lab 204 again, I heard a faint sound, a whisper, almost like someone muttering. I stopped. "Hello," I called softly. No answer. I told myself it was the air vent or some old buildings made noises. Still, I felt uneasy. I glanced at Lab 204 again. The door was closed. I could have sworn I left it open. I reached the side exit only to find it locked. Odd. It was always unlocked for emergencies. I jiggled the handle. Nothing. I walked back toward the main hallway, my steps echoed. Then I heard it again, a whisper. This time clearer, my name. I froze. The voice was soft, almost apologetic, calling me by my first name. "Who's there?" I asked, heart racing. Silence. I scanned the hallway, empty. No shadow, no movement. I backed toward the main lab area, thinking maybe I could find a janitor or another student. The lights flickered, one by one, then steadied. I noticed the doors to the other labs were all locked, except Lab 204. The door was wide open this time. I approached slowly, telling myself I'd just check and lock it again. But as I stepped inside, the smell hit me first. Faint, metallic like chemicals, but sharper, stronger than anything stored there. Then I saw it, a notebook on the main bench. I was sure it hadn't been there. I picked it up. Pages were filled with calculations, but also strange notes in handwriting that wasn't mine. Numbers mixed with short sentences. "Don't leave. They're here, listen." I dropped the notebook, heart pounding. A faint noise came from the back of the lab, a chair scraping against the floor. I turned slowly. The room was empty. The chair hadn't been moved when I entered. I walked to the door. It was locked again. I tried the handle, it wouldn't budge. The whisper came again, louder this time. "You shouldn't be here." I spun around. Nothing. Panic set in. I remembered the emergency phone at the end of the hallway. Maybe I could call security. I ran to the hallway, but the lights flickered, and the hallway seemed longer. The end didn't look familiar. I could have sworn the walls stretched. I heard footsteps, slow, behind me. I ran. I reached the end of the hallway only to find a locked door that I didn't recognize. The phone wasn't there. I slammed my fists against the door. "Let me out." Silence. Then the whispers became multiple voices, overlapping, almost unintelligible. I pressed my back against the wall and tried to calm myself. This had to be exhaustion. I had stayed late, worked hard, maybe imagined it all. I took a deep breath and slowly walked back toward Lab 204. The notebook was back on the bench, open to a page I hadn't seen before. Words were written in bold letters. "You can't leave." I swallowed hard. I backed away, looking for another exit. Then I noticed a small window at the top of the wall. I could barely see outside, dark campus grounds, empty streets, faint light from the street lamps. Maybe I could climb through. As I started toward it, the lights flickered violently. The temperature dropped. I could see my breath. A shadow moved across the far wall. I froze. It wasn't a person. Not exactly. Just a dark shape, humanoid but distorted, stretching across the room. The whisper came again. "You shouldn't be here." I ran toward the window. My fingers scraped the frame as I tried to open it. It was stuck. I slammed my shoulder against it. Nothing. Then I heard it. Footsteps approaching from inside Lab 204. Fast this time. Not slow, not deliberate, fast. I turned to face the door. It opened by itself. My heart was hammering. I reached the window again, and this time it gave way. I fell onto the grass outside, scraping my hands and knees. I looked back at the building. The lights were back to normal. The hallway empty. No shadows, no whispers. I ran across campus to the dorms without looking back. The next morning, I told my professor what happened. He listened carefully but didn't act alarmed. "That lab is old," he said. "Sometimes students leave equipment out and it makes noises at night. Old buildings can play tricks on your mind." I nodded, not wanting to argue, but I didn't return to the chemistry building after hours again. Weeks later, a janitor mentioned something strange. They said someone got locked in Lab 204 a few years ago. Never found him until morning. Didn't make sense. Security thought he left, but he never signed out. I stopped in my tracks. I never told anyone else. Sometimes at night, when I walk past the chemistry building, I see the window of Lab 204, just a faint glow, and I don't walk any closer.